She risked her life for the Apache women daughters. His gift was born of war. The sun rose slowly over the dry, rugged lands of the American Southwest. The earth was cracked, and the air carried a dry heat that made every step difficult. Winds blew sand and dust across the settlements, leaving people squinting and coughing. It was a place of hard survival, where every day could bring danger or scarcity. Families lived cautiously, knowing that life in the desert was fragile and that neighbors and strangers alike could bring trouble at any time. Eleanor Whitmore had never imagined life could be so harsh. She had grown up far from the desert in a small, green farming town. There, the air was fresh and children played safely in open fields. She had known comfort and security, a life where danger was something told in stories, not something faced every morning. But Eleanor's life had changed when she married a military medic, a kind and brave man named Thomas Whitmore, who had been stationed near the frontier. She had followed him, leaving behind everything familiar, her family, her friends, and the gentle life she had known. The desert was nothing like home. It was harsh, unforgiving, and full of uncertainty. The Whitmore's small settlement was made of wooden homes and tents patched with canvas. Water was scarce and food often ran short. Each day required careful planning. Where to get water, how to avoid conflict, how to survive both the heat and the dangers that came with living in unsettled lands. Despite these hardships, Eleanor tried to make a life. She carried herself with quiet strength, tending to her home and helping Thomas with his work whenever she could. She had learned quickly to understand the land, to recognize the plants that could be eaten and the paths that could be followed safely. But even as she adapted, fear and tension lingered in the air, like a shadow over the settlement. One morning, the usual stillness of the desert was broken by distant shouts and the sound of hurried movement. Eleanor's heart tightened. Conflict had returned to the land. Soldiers were moving through the area, searching for groups of Apache families who had been resisting relocation. Fires burned in the distance, and smoke rose like dark fingers into the sky. People were panicking. Families hurriedly packed their belongings, wagons rattling over the uneven ground, trying to flee before the soldiers arrived. The desert, already harsh, now felt even more threatening. Thomas had been injured in a previous skirmish, and he had been sent back east to recover. Eleanor was left alone, a young woman in a dangerous and unfamiliar land. She had the chance to leave, to take what little belongings she had and find safety elsewhere. Many neighbors insisted she should go immediately. "It's not safe for you here," they warned. "You can't stay alone." But Eleanor hesitated. She had come this far. She had learned the ways of the land and the people in it. Something in her heart told her she could not abandon everyone behind. She could not ignore those who needed help, even if it meant putting herself at risk. That very afternoon, Eleanor noticed movement near the edge of the settlement. A small group of women and children were hiding behind a ridge, their eyes wide with fear. They were Apache families who had become separated from their main group during the chaos. Their clothes were tattered, and they carried only what they could hold. The mothers clutched their daughters tightly, shielding them from sight. The children looked at Eleanor with curiosity and fear, unsure if she was friend or foe. The women's faces were filled with worry, and Eleanor could see that they had been running for days, seeking safety that had not come. Many of the settlers nearby had already called for soldiers to be alerted. Fear made people act harshly. Some claimed the women were dangerous. Others simply wanted to avoid trouble. But Eleanor saw something different. She did not see enemies. She saw mothers protecting their children. She saw girls who did not understand why the world had turned violent. She saw families trying to survive in a place that was cruel and unforgiving, and she could not turn away. Eleanor made a choice that would change everything. She decided to hide the women and their daughters. She led them to an abandoned storage building behind her home, a small wooden shack that had once been used to store grain and supplies. The building was dusty and empty, but it was safe, hidden from the eyes of soldiers and curious settlers. Eleanor brought water under the cover of darkness, careful not to draw attention. She shared her food, meager though it was, and even risked taking items from her neighbors' abandoned supplies when necessary. Each day was a careful balance of protection and survival. The women and children were cautious at first. They did not speak much, and Eleanor could not speak their language. Communication was a struggle, filled with gestures, expressions, and slow demonstrations. But over time, small connections began to form. Eleanor learned to understand the signs of fear and hunger, the way a child might reach for comfort, the way a mother's eyes searched for reassurance, and the women began to trust her, slowly, quietly. They realized she meant no harm. She was there to help. Living together in such close quarters was challenging. Every noise, every sound outside the building sent hearts racing. Soldiers often passed nearby, questioning settlers and searching properties. Eleanor's hands shook when she brought water or food to the hiding women. Every step could have led to discovery, yet she continued. She treated small injuries and tended to fevers with the knowledge she had gained assisting her husband. When one of the children scraped her knee on the rough wood of the shack, Eleanor's hands moved carefully, cleaning the wound and bandaging it, whispering softly to calm the frightened child. She had become their protector, their guardian in a world that had suddenly become dangerous and uncertain. The days were long, and the nights even longer. Eleanor would lie awake listening for sounds outside, the distant calls of soldiers, the shifting wind through the desert, the occasional howl of a coyote. Every noise made her heart leap. But she also listened for the small sounds of life inside the shack, the breathing of sleeping children, the quiet murmur of a mother's reassurance, the soft shuffle of tiny feet. These sounds reminded her why she risked everything. They were alive, and they needed her. Despite the fear, small moments of happiness appeared. The daughters laughed softly when Eleanor taught them simple games. They showed her how to grind seeds and prepare small meals using desert herbs. The mothers shared their knowledge of the land, how to find water hidden beneath the earth, which plants could heal wounds, and how to move quietly without leaving tracks. Eleanor absorbed everything she could, learning from these women who had lived in the desert all their lives. Each day was a lesson in survival and courage. And in return she gave them safety, kindness, and protection. One evening, the danger came closer than ever. Soldiers were searching properties nearby, asking questions of anyone they saw. Eleanor stood at her door, heart pounding, praying that no one would enter her home. She could feel the eyes of the hiding women and children on her. They trusted her completely. If the soldiers discovered them, it would mean certain punishment, or worse. But fate, or perhaps sheer luck, allowed the soldiers to move on without noticing anything. That night, Eleanor sat beside the women and children, holding the hands of the girls and whispering comfort. They understood her, even without words. She had risked everything to keep them safe, and now, for one night, peace returned. As time passed, Eleanor began to feel a connection that went beyond protection. She saw the strength in the mother's eyes, the resilience in the daughter's laughter, and the quiet courage that allowed them to survive day after day. She realized that in helping them, she had also found her own purpose. She was no longer just a settler in the desert, a young woman alone and frightened. She had become part of something larger. A small family formed not by blood, but by shared struggle and compassion. Each day brought new challenges. Food was never enough. Water had to be carefully rationed. And yet, Eleanor's determination never wavered. She found ways to stretch their supplies, to find hidden water sources, to teach the children simple skills that might one day help them survive on their own. The girls began to smile more often, to play quietly with one another, and to trust Eleanor completely. Their mothers, once wary and tense, began to relax, knowing they were no longer entirely alone in a dangerous world. Eleanor had become their lifeline. Through it all, Eleanor never let fear control her. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Each time she moved quietly through the desert, carrying water or supplies, she reminded herself of the stakes. She was not just protecting strangers, she was preserving hope. And in doing so, she discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. As the days passed, the desert began to feel less like a hostile place and more like a home of survival and possibility. Eleanor and the women adapted together, finding routines and rhythms in their hidden life. They laughed quietly, shared small joys, and created a sense of safety that had seemed impossible when they first met. And all the while, the harsh world outside continued, a reminder that danger was never far away. Yet in that small, abandoned building, life persisted, protected by the courage of a single woman willing to risk everything for strangers in need. Days turned into weeks, and the small group hidden in Eleanor's shack began to adjust to their new reality. Life was never easy, but slowly a rhythm of survival emerged. Eleanor had become the quiet anchor for the women and their daughters. She rose before sunrise every morning to fetch water from a hidden spring she had discovered beyond the ridges. The journey was long and the path was treacherous, but Eleanor never complained. She carried clay pots carefully, balancing them on her hips and shoulders, making sure each step was cautious to avoid being seen by passing soldiers. The women and children waited in the shack, their eyes bright with anticipation and anxiety each time she returned. Even though they could not speak the same language, a shared understanding passed between them. A glance, a gesture, a nod, conveying relief and gratitude that words could not capture. At first, the daughters were shy and hesitant. Some would cling to their mothers, peeking around corners to watch Eleanor, unsure whether to trust her. The older girls would sometimes hide behind the women, whispering in their native tongue, eyes wide as though the slightest misstep could bring danger. Eleanor, understanding the fragility of trust, never pushed. Instead, she would kneel down to their level, offering a gentle smile, a soft word, and small acts of kindness, a clean rag to wipe their hands, a cup of cool water, or a slice of bread. Over time, the girls began to respond, their laughter, timid at first, then louder, echoing softly against the wooden walls. The women, too, were cautious. They had been through so much, chased from their homes, separated from friends and family, forced to hide in fear. Eleanor observed them quietly, offering help without intrusion, treating their wounds, sharing her limited knowledge of medicine and hygiene, and listening to the unspoken fears that lay behind their eyes. Slowly, walls of mistrust began to crumble. The women realized Eleanor's presence was not a threat. She was not a soldier, not an enemy, but a guardian who had risked her own safety to provide shelter and care. Life inside the shack became a delicate balance of survival and learning. Eleanor taught the daughters small skills, things they would need if they had to face the desert alone. She showed them how to gather dry sticks for firewood, how to make simple tools from scraps of wood, and how to carry water safely without spilling a drop. The mothers, in return, shared their deep knowledge of the land. They taught Eleanor how to find edible plants in the desert, how to recognize the tracks of animals, and how to move silently so that no one would notice them. Even in this time of danger, there was growth, learning, and connection, a bond forged through shared struggle. One evening, a sudden sandstorm swept across the land. The wind howled like a living creature, and fine grains of sand whipped against the walls of the shack. The sound was deafening, and Eleanor could see fear in the eyes of the women and children. She moved quickly, guiding the daughters to the floor and covering their heads with blankets. She whispered calming words even though they could not understand her completely. Her presence, steady and confident, brought comfort to the frightened group. When the storm finally subsided, the small figures huddled together, trembling but alive. Eleanor's courage had become a source of strength for them all. Food and water were always scarce. Eleanor had to plan carefully, rationing every morsel and drop. She would sneak into abandoned supply areas or scavenge the land for edible roots and plants. Sometimes, she traded small goods quietly with neighbors who were sympathetic, never revealing the presence of her hidden guests. Every day brought the risk of discovery, but Eleanor's resourcefulness and determination kept them fed and alive. The children grew stronger, their laughter returning slowly as their stomachs filled and their bodies healed. The mothers, too, began to relax, seeing that Eleanor's dedication was unwavering. One of the daughters, a bright girl of about 10 named Naya, began to follow Eleanor everywhere. She watched closely as Eleanor cleaned wounds, prepared meals, and moved cautiously through the desert. Naya's curiosity was endless, and her admiration for Eleanor grew with each passing day. Eleanor, in turn, began to teach Naya small skills: how to make a simple fire, how to find safe water, and how to carry supplies without spilling. Naya's mother watched quietly, a mixture of caution and relief in her eyes. She could see that Eleanor was not only keeping her daughter safe, but also teaching her the tools she would need to survive in a dangerous world. Despite the danger, moments of joy found their way into the shack. The daughters braided each other's hair and laughed softly, their giggles echoing against the wooden walls. Eleanor joined in, learning to braid as well, and the simple act of sharing laughter created bonds that went beyond language. The mothers taught Eleanor traditional songs, soft and melodic, that told stories of their people and their history. Eleanor listened intently, recognizing the value of culture and memory in the midst of fear. Together, they created a small world inside the shack. A world where hope could exist even in the shadow of danger. But danger was never far away. Soldiers patrolled nearby, questioning settlers, searching properties, and enforcing strict rules. Eleanor had to remain vigilant at all times. Every sound outside made her heart race. I got it. Every shadow could hide a threat. Yet she never let fear control her actions. She learned to move quietly, to anticipate the soldiers' patrols, and to find hidden routes for gathering supplies. Her courage inspired the women and daughters, showing them that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. One night, Eleanor woke to the sound of distant voices. Soldiers were moving closer than usual, their boots crunching over the dry desert floor. She peeked through a small gap in the wall and held her breath, counting their steps and timing their patrols. She whispered to the women and daughters to stay low, and they obeyed, trembling but silent. The soldiers passed without noticing anything, and Eleanor let out a silent sigh of relief. The group hugged one another, feeling the unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each day of shared danger. In the quiet moments, Eleanor reflected on her choices. She had risked everything: her safety, her future, and her freedom. To protect these women and daughters she had only recently met. She had no obligation, no promise, but something in her heart had compelled her to act. She realized that courage was not about fame or recognition. It was about doing what was right even when the world was full of fear and uncertainty. And in protecting them, she had discovered a strength within herself that she had never known existed. The days grew longer, and the seasons began to change. Heat waves scorched the land, and cold nights crept over the desert. Eleanor adapted, teaching the children how to layer themselves for warmth, how to keep the fire burning safely, and how to find hidden places to rest during the hottest part of the day. The mothers shared stories of their own childhoods, teaching Eleanor about resilience and patience. Every day was a lesson in survival, compassion, and understanding. Through all these challenges, the daughters began to blossom. Their laughter grew louder, their eyes brighter, and their trust in Eleanor deepened. Naya especially became brave in small ways, venturing to gather sticks, helping Eleanor cook, and even attempting to communicate simple words in broken English. Eleanor encouraged her, praising her small victories and reinforcing her courage. The mothers watched with pride, seeing their children regain hope in a world that had once been filled only with fear. Eleanor also learned from the women. They taught her how to observe the desert, to understand its patterns, and to predict its dangers. They shared knowledge of medicinal plants, ways to purify water, and methods of moving quietly without leaving tracks. Eleanor realized that the women's wisdom was a gift, one that had been passed down for generations, and she absorbed it eagerly. Together they formed a partnership, an unspoken alliance that transcended language, culture, and fear. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Eleanor, the women, and the daughters grew unbreakable. Each day, the small group navigated the challenges of the desert together, supporting one another, learning from one another, and surviving through courage, trust, and determination. Eleanor had transformed from a frightened young woman into a guardian, a teacher, and a friend. And in the eyes of the women and daughters, she was no longer an outsider. She was part of their world, a world built not on fear or conflict, but on hope, bravery, and shared humanity. By the end of this long period, Eleanor had created something remarkable, a safe haven in the middle of danger, a place where laughter could exist alongside fear, and where courage and compassion were stronger than the threats surrounding them. She had risked her life not for recognition or reward, but because she understood that every child, every mother, deserved a chance to survive and to hope. And in doing so, she had become a hero in their eyes, a hero whose quiet bravery would be remembered long after the desert winds had carried away the sounds of their fear. Months had passed since Eleanor had first hidden the Apache women and their daughters in the small, dusty shack behind her home. The desert sun continued to blaze, relentless and unforgiving, and yet within the shelter, life persisted. Eleanor had grown stronger, more confident and more skilled in surviving the harsh land. She had learned not only how to protect her hidden guests, but also how to manage the small risks that came with venturing outside, gathering water, and finding food. Yet, despite her growing skill, the danger never fully disappeared. Soldiers patrolled nearby, rumors of conflicts swirled, and every sound beyond the shack's walls could send hearts racing with fear. One morning, Eleanor noticed that one of the younger daughters, a small girl named Lila, looked weaker than usual. Her eyes were dull and her movements slow. She had developed a high fever during the night, and her mother hovered anxiously, unsure how to help. Eleanor's heart clenched. She had faced danger countless times, but the vulnerability of a sick child stirred a new kind of fear. She examined Leela carefully, using the knowledge she had gained from assisting her husband and the women's teachings about desert herbs. Eleanor tried to calm the mother, explaining in gestures and simple words that she would do everything she could to help her daughter survive. The days that followed were tense. Eleanor used her limited supplies of medicine carefully, cleaning Lila's small cuts and scrapes, brewing weak teas from roots she had learned to recognize as safe, and carefully monitoring her temperature. Eleanor slept very little, taking shifts with the mother to make sure Lila was never left alone. The other daughters watched quietly, their eyes wide with fear, as they had never seen someone so small, so vulnerable. Eleanor spoke softly to them, telling them stories to distract them from the worry, letting her calmness ripple through the children like a gentle tide. Eleanor knew that the child's life was at risk, and she faced a painful choice. The local doctor who traveled between settlements was her only hope of saving Lila. But seeking help meant revealing the presence of the hidden women and girls, exposing them to soldiers or hostile settlers. The thought of discovery filled Eleanor with dread. Yet she understood that staying silent could mean losing Lila. Courage, she realized, was not just about hiding or surviving. It was about making hard choices, even when the consequences were frightening. Under the cover of dawn, Eleanor prepared for the journey. She wrapped Lila carefully, ensuring that she could be carried without alerting anyone to their presence. She moved with silent determination, stepping cautiously through the desert's uneven paths. Each movement was precise. Every sound she made could draw unwanted attention. The wind carried whispers of the past night's storm across the dunes, and she used the shifting sands to hide her footprints as much as possible. Her heart pounded, not just with fear for her own safety, but with concern for the fragile life she carried. The doctor's tent was set up near a small settlement, and Eleanor approached with caution. She had prepared a story, telling him that Lila was her own relative, a child who had fallen ill far from home. The doctor, a kind man with gentle eyes, immediately recognized the severity of the child's condition. Eleanor watched him closely, waiting for suspicion or questions, but he focused only on Lila's care. He treated her fever with care and provided supplies for recovery. Eleanor stayed close, helping as best she could, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Lila's small hand grasped hers, and Eleanor felt the weight of every choice she had made to protect this family. By the end of the week, Lila's condition began to improve. Her cheeks regained color, her eyes brightened, and her small voice began to murmur words once more. Eleanor's relief was overwhelming, yet she knew that their safety was still fragile. They could not remain in one place for long, and the desert outside continued to hold dangers of its own. Yet, for the first time in many months, Eleanor allowed herself a small moment of hope. She had saved a child's life, and in doing so, she had proven not only her courage, but also the strength of the bond she had formed with the women and daughters. Amid this fragile peace, Eleanor discovered that she was expecting a child of her own. The news was both joyful and frightening. She had not realized until this moment that life could continue, even in a place so full of danger. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future, of raising a child in a land so harsh, of the lessons she had learned, and of the women and daughters she had come to love as her own family. This child would be born into a world shaped by conflict, yet nurtured by the courage and care of those who refused to surrender to fear. As the desert continued to shift and change with the seasons, news arrived that some Apache families had been granted safe passage to distant lands. Relocation plans were being made, and the women knew they could not remain hidden forever. Eleanor prepared for their departure with a heavy heart. She had grown attached to these families, and parting with them felt like losing a piece of herself. Yet she understood that survival sometimes meant letting go. She organized their belongings, packed supplies, and guided them along hidden routes that she had mapped during their months together. Every step was taken with caution, for the soldiers still patrolled the area, and any misstep could lead to disaster. On the night before their departure, the eldest mother, who had remained quiet for much of their time together, approached Eleanor. With hands roughened from years of labor, she pressed a small carved charm into Eleanor's palms. The charm was made of desert wood, etched with symbols of protection and life. Eleanor accepted it, understanding its meaning even without the language to explain fully. This simple gift carried the gratitude, respect, and bond formed through months of shared fear, hope, and survival. It was a tangible symbol of the lives Eleanor had helped protect, a reminder of the courage that had guided them all. The journey ahead was long and fraught with uncertainty. Eleanor guided the women and daughters carefully, keeping them hidden from soldiers and hostile eyes. They moved quietly through the night, avoiding open paths and using natural cover whenever possible. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but Eleanor's knowledge and careful planning ensured that they remained safe. Each step was a test of endurance, yet the group moved with determination, driven by the hope of reaching a place where they could live without fear. Months later, when Eleanor gave birth to her son, she named him Gabriel, meaning strength from God. The desert wind carried the cries of the newborn, a sound of life and hope in a land that had known so much fear. She tied the carved charm given by the eldest mother around his neck, a symbol of protection, resilience, and the bond between their families. Gabriel was born into a world of two cultures, two legacies, one shaped by conflict and one nurtured by courage and compassion. The birth of Gabriel brought a sense of completion and continuity. Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The fear, the danger, the laughter of daughters regaining trust, the quiet moments of learning, and the life she had saved. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about embracing life, even when it came with uncertainty. Gabriel's birth was a reminder that even in the harshest places, life could thrive when nurtured with care, bravery, and love. Eleanor's son grew under the watchful eyes of the women and daughters she had protected. Though their paths would eventually diverge, the lessons learned and bonds formed during those months in the shack would never be forgotten. Gabriel carried not only the love of his mother, but also the history and resilience of the women who had trusted her. The carved charm remained a symbol of the lives intertwined by courage, of a bridge built between two worlds, and of the quiet heroism that had shaped their survival. The story of Eleanor, the women, and the daughters was one of bravery and humanity. It was a story of a woman who risked everything to protect strangers, who embraced the uncertainty of the desert to safeguard life, and who created a legacy through compassion and courage. Gabriel's birth, marked by the charm from the eldest mother, was a tangible reminder that even in times of war and fear, gifts of love, hope, and protection could emerge. Life in the desert would continue to challenge them, but Eleanor had proven that survival was not only about enduring hardship, but also about nurturing connection. She had transformed fear into courage, danger into protection, and chaos into a small, resilient family. Her actions were a testament to the power of empathy and bravery, showing that even in the darkest times, light could shine through acts of selfless care. Through the months of fear, illness, and uncertainty, Eleanor had discovered that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. She had risked her life for mothers and daughters she barely knew, and in return, she had created a family bound not by blood but by shared humanity. Gabriel, born of this world of conflict and hope, carried with him the legacy of bravery, compassion, and the enduring power of women who refused to let fear define them. And so, the desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became a place of hope. The lives Eleanor had touched were forever changed, and the child she brought into the world symbolized the strength that comes from risking everything for the safety and future of others. The charm around Gabriel's neck was more than a gift. It was a promise, a connection, and a testament to the courage that had been born of war. Years passed after the difficult days Eleanor had spent protecting the Apache women and their daughters. The desert, once harsh and full of fear, had changed in small ways. Railroads were slowly being built, settlements expanded, and new families moved into the area. The land itself seemed quieter in some ways, but Eleanor knew that danger had never truly disappeared. She had learned to live with vigilance, always aware of the world around her, yet her heart carried a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Gabriel, Eleanor's son, grew quickly. From the very beginning, he was a curious and thoughtful child. He often asked questions about the world, about the desert, and about the people who lived in it. Eleanor, who had once feared for his life even before he was born, now found joy in watching him explore, learn, and understand the world around him. The charm from the eldest Apache mother remained tied around his neck, a constant reminder of the bravery and love that had protected not only him, but the women and children who had been hidden in the shack so many years before. Though Gabriel did not yet understand the full story of his birth or the risks his mother had taken, he could sense the importance of the charm. It was as though the small piece of carved wood carried the memory of courage, of lives saved, and of the quiet bravery of those who had lived and survived. Eleanor often found herself staring at him, wondering what kind of man he would become, knowing that the story of survival, trust, and compassion was part of his life even before he had taken his first steps. Eleanor waited until Gabriel was old enough to understand, and then she began to share the story with him. She told him, slowly and carefully, about the chaos of the desert, about the soldiers who patrolled the land, and about the Apache families who had been separated from their people. She spoke of the fear, the uncertainty, and the long nights when she had kept watch over the children, never allowing a sound to escape her lips that might endanger them. Gabriel listened with wide eyes, absorbing every detail. He could feel the tension, the danger, and most importantly, the courage that his mother had displayed. The story of the women and daughters, of Lila's illness and survival, and of the charm from the eldest mother became a lesson for Gabriel. Eleanor explained that courage was not always shown in battle, nor was it always loud and obvious. Sometimes courage was quiet. Sometimes it was hidden in simple, selfless acts, carrying water under a scorching sun, soothing a frightened child, or risking your own safety to save someone else. Gabriel understood, even as a young boy, that bravery and compassion were not just stories, they were choices. As he grew older, Gabriel began to see the world through the lessons his mother had taught him. He noticed the struggles of other people, the ways that fear and misunderstanding could divide communities, and he felt a deep desire to help. When he was old enough, he began learning about the native communities in the region, studying their language and customs, and understanding their history. He realized that the women his mother had helped had carried knowledge and wisdom that needed to be respected, even after they were gone. Eleanor watched him with pride, knowing that the courage and love she had demonstrated had planted a seed that would grow into something powerful in her son. Gabriel chose to dedicate himself to bridging gaps between communities. He became a translator and advocate, helping native communities communicate with local officials and working to ensure that misunderstandings did not lead to fear or conflict. Many people around him did not understand why he cared so deeply, why he spent so much time helping those who were often overlooked or misunderstood. But Eleanor knew. She understood that the story of the desert, the women and daughters, and the charm that had protected him all carried a lesson. Empathy and courage could change the world, even in the smallest of ways. The charm around Gabriel's neck remained a constant symbol of the past. It reminded him of the women who had trusted Eleanor, of the daughters who had learned to laugh again, and of the quiet moments of hope in a world filled with danger. Over time, the charm became more than a symbol of protection. It became a symbol of connection, of the lives intertwined by choices made in the face of fear and of the enduring impact of a single woman's courage. Eleanor herself grew older, yet her spirit remained strong. She would often walk through the desert, teaching Gabriel about the land she had come to know so intimately. She showed him how to read the patterns of the wind, how to find hidden water sources, and how to recognize the signs of animals and plants. But more than that, she taught him about life, the importance of helping others, the value of patience and understanding, and the power of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. Gabriel listened carefully, absorbing the lessons as if they were treasures passed down from a time of trial and bravery. Even as the years moved forward, Eleanor never spoke publicly about the secret she had kept. The story of the women and daughters, of the risk and the fear, remained hers alone to tell. She had no desire for recognition. The knowledge that she had saved lives, nurtured hope, and created a small haven of safety was enough. But in her heart she knew that the story lived on in Gabriel, in the lessons he carried, and in the quiet ways he worked to make the world a better place. Gabriel's understanding of the charm and its meaning deepened as he grew. He realized that it was not just a gift from the past, but also a guide for the future. It reminded him to act with courage, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and to honor the choices of those who had come before him. It was a link between generations, a bridge between cultures, and a symbol of the strength that comes from compassion and empathy. Through Gabriel's actions, Eleanor's legacy lived on. He worked tirelessly to foster understanding and trust between communities, often putting himself in difficult situations to speak for those who had no voice. He remembered every story his mother had told him, every lesson she had imparted, and every act of bravery she had shown. And through it all, he carried the charm, feeling its presence as a reminder of the lives saved, the dangers overcome, and the power of a single person's choices. The women and daughters Eleanor had protected eventually settled in new lands. Though many of their faces were now just memories, their impact on Eleanor's life remained vivid. Their resilience, their wisdom, and their trust had shaped the woman she became and the values she passed on to her son. Eleanor often thought of them, hoping they had found peace and safety in their new homes, and taking comfort in the knowledge that she had played a part in preserving their lives. Eleanor's later years were quiet but full of reflection. She would sit with Gabriel, telling him stories of the desert, of the people she had met, and of the choices she had made. They would watch the sun rise over the dry land, feeling the warmth of the day and the memory of the past. In these moments, Eleanor realized that courage and love were inseparable. One without the other could not have preserved the lives of the women and daughters, nor could it have shaped Gabriel into the man he was becoming. The desert itself seemed to honor the lives Eleanor had touched. The wind carried whispers of the past, the sand shifted gently as if in recognition, and the land, once harsh and unyielding, now held memories of survival and hope. The small shack where Eleanor had first hidden the families had long since fallen into disrepair, but the stories it held lived on in memory, in lessons passed from mother to son, and in the lives of those who had once found refuge there. Gabriel grew into adulthood with a deep sense of purpose. He understood the weight of his mother's choices and the responsibility that came with carrying the charm and the story behind it. He continued to act with compassion and courage, guided by the lessons of the past. And though the world around him continued to change, with new challenges and new conflicts, he faced each day with the knowledge that even small acts of bravery and kindness could make a difference. The story of Eleanor, the women, and the daughters became a quiet legend within their family. Gabriel shared it with his children and grandchildren, not as a tale of heroism to boast about, but as a lesson in empathy, courage, and the power of protecting those in need. The charm, carefully preserved through the years, was passed down, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that the choices of one person can echo through generations. Eleanor passed away peacefully many years later, her life full of love, courage, and quiet triumph. She left behind a son who had inherited not only her strength, but also her heart. Gabriel carried forward her legacy, using it to connect people, heal divisions, and foster understanding. The women and daughters she had protected may have been far away, but their influence, combined with Eleanor's courage, shaped a future that honored their lives and choices. And so the desert, once a place of danger and fear, became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of courage. Eleanor's story, carried on through Gabriel, and the charm that linked them all, reminded the world that even in the darkest times, acts of compassion and bravery could leave an everlasting mark. The lives she had saved, the bonds she had formed, and the lessons she had taught would never be forgotten, living on in the hearts of those who remembered and in the generations that followed. The desert wind continued to sweep across the land, carrying stories of courage and humanity. And somewhere, tied around Gabriel's neck, the small carved charm hung as a symbol of all that had been endured, all that had been saved, and all that had been given freely, without expectation, in the name of love and life.